So I was watching this YouTube video one day. I can't even remember what the video was about, but someone had mentioned about how the millennials are the generation that understands the necessity to heal. And I would wholeheartedly, agree with that. Everywhere you go on social media, whether it be YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the like, you see a lot of millennials talking about healing. The only thing is, just like with everything else, there is Yahuwah's version of healing, and then there's the world's version of healing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, let's get into it. Moment of transparency. So, about a week ago, when I sat down to write the outline to this podcast episode, I just couldn't get the words in my head to come out onto the paper the way I wanted them to come out. And yes, I said paper. Like I love notebooks and pens, you guys. Like I tried doing an outline on the computer and it's just like, no, I gotta have my notebooks and my paper. Okay. Total sidebar. But anyway, Ruach HaKodesh has said, just talk. Tell them what I showed you. Tell them what I taught you. And I'm like, all right, bet. So before I get into that, I just want to talk to you a little bit about landmines. And I know it seems kind of like, what? Landmines? What does that have to do with anything? But I promise you it's going to make sense in the end. So landmines are a type of device that militaries would use in order to, I guess, ambush. You could use it's the word you could use for it. Their adversaries. So a landmine can either be attached to the surface of the ground or buried underneath the ground. Most of the time, it's buried just under the surface of the ground. Makes it more effective because it's hidden. And they would put it in areas where it would be easy to not spot it, so it could hide easily. And what happens is a person steps on the landmine, or you have some that are meant for like tanks, but let's just use people. You have a person that steps on the landmine, they hear that click because it's activated. The trigger of the landmine is activated on the top by pressure being placed on it. But the problem is, once that trigger is activated through pressure, if that pressure comes off of it, then the landmine explodes, and whomever activated it or whatever, because it could be an animal, but whomever activated it, it's just that's it. That's all she wrote. So keep that imagery in mind while we talk about triggers. All right, so like I stated before, there's always Yahuwah's version of something and then the imitation fake version that the world offers. When it comes to healing, so the world's version of healing is suppressing and burying your triggers. Suppressing and burying your triggers. So that's where the landmine comes into play. The world's version of healing is like that landmine that is buried underneath the ground. And the thing about landmines is they can stay active for up to 50 plus years. Okay? That's a long time, a very long time. So the world's version of healing tells you to go no contact indefinitely with people. It tells you to suppress and bury. It tells you to avoid. Pretty much, the world's version of healing will take you through all of the steps of PTSD. But Yahuwah's version of healing is literally deactivating the landmine, removing the trigger. That's how you deactivate the landmine, is by removing the trigger. If there is no trigger, the landmine is no longer active. So I mentioned PTSD, and so I do want to talk to you briefly about the 4 steps to PTSD, or 4 types of PTSD, or whatever you want to call them. So the first one is intrusive memories. The second is avoidance. The third is negative changes in thinking and mood. And the fourth is changes in physical and emotional reactions. All right, and I'm going to give some examples of these just to help you kind of understand what this is talking about. So, when it comes to intrusive memories, these are recurrent and unwanted distressing memories of some type of traumatic event. They can come in the form of flashbacks, nightmares, severe emotional distress, or physical reactions to something that reminds you of the traumatic event. Then you have, well, an example of this is slavery or racial profiling resulting in a senseless murder. So we can all agree that those can be very traumatic experiences that can cause intrusive memories to surface in one's mind. Then you have avoidance. So avoidance is when you try not to think or talk about the place of the traumatic event. People also avoid places, activities, or people that remind them of the traumatic event, like going no contact with your entire family, for demonizing you for being raped by a family member, all while making excuses for that family member, but making you seem like you are evil. How dare you be raped? Or it doesn't have to be something so severe, but I just use that example because unfortunately I know people that is something that's happened to them. And the fact that I know people and not just a person, to me, I feel like it might be something that's a little more common than any of us really want to admit. So then you have negative changes in thinking and mood. So that could be towards yourself or other people or the world, hopelessness about the future, memory problems, including not remembering important aspects of the traumatic event, difficulty maintaining close relationships, feeling isolated, lack of interest in activities once enjoyed, difficulty experiencing positive emotions, and emotional numbness. And the last one is changes in physical and emotional reactions. Being easily startled or triggered is one of those things. Always being on guard for danger, and you should always be on guard for danger. So I have to pause right there because I know someone's like, but shouldn't we always be on guard because the Bible tells us to be on guard? Yes, you're absolutely right. Please understand that if you only exhibit like a few of these things, it doesn't necessarily mean you're showing signs of PTSD. It's if you show a whole bunch of these signs, if majority of what I've already mentioned can be applied to you, then you just may be experiencing a form of PTSD. And some people's PTSD is not as is more mild than other people's. So yes, you should always be on guard for danger. So I just want to throw that in there real quick. But self-destructive behaviors like drug addictions, sleep issues like insomnia, trouble concentrating, irritability, angry outbursts, or aggressive behavior, overwhelming guilt or shame. Okay, so these are signs of PTSD. And if you notice that when someone who does not have a relationship with Yahuwah says that they are healed, they tend to show a lot of these signs of PTSD. Think about the whole cancel culture. The main people that have cancel culture are those that, or that started cancel culture, are those that promote healing and harmony and all this other stuff. However, they're the most easily offended. Then you have the group of people that they just avoid everybody, and going no contact is not a bad thing. For like, I've had to go no contact for a brief amount of time with certain people until I was able to get healed, and then I was able to go back over, because that's how you know you were really healed. The better word to use in this instance is delivered. That's how you know you were delivered from whatever it was, is because you're able to be in that environment and it doesn't trigger you. Okay, that's Yahuwah's version of healing. It's deliverance. He literally delivers you from the PTSD that one faces after the traumatic events. Now, here's the thing. We may not have personally ever experienced, like there's someone listening right now that might never have experienced a traumatic event. You've had events happen, but they weren't traumatic. But you got to understand, someone in your bloodline has gone through something traumatic, and that the PTSD that they went through was passed down to you through your bloodline, because it develops a certain mentality in a person. It develops a character, if you will, in a person. And those characteristics that it develops in that person is passed down to the next generation, and then to the next generation, and to the next generation. And so you have all these triggers. You have all these landmines in your bloodline. You have all these landmines in your bloodline that need to be deactivated. And the way that happens is through deliverance. Now, how does Yahuwah deliver you? He delivers you by having you face the very thing. Well, first of all, you have to admit to the fact that you even have an issue. And then he has you face it. So what he did with me, what was going on with me was he had me on a fast. And I'm okay with talking about it because I'm no longer on that fast. He had me on a fast. And one of the things he's always had me to do when I'm on a fast is everything, because, the flesh is dying. So everything that I start to see coming out of me while I'm on that fast, he has me to make a list of it. And then every day I pray and I ask him to remove that particular thing from me and, fill me up with more and more of his Ruach. And I remember the very first time he ever had me to do that, I had like 70 something things on the list. This time the list wasn't nearly as long. I never counted how many things were on the list, but I'm happy to say it was significantly less than 70. If it maybe was like 20 things, probably only like 15 things. So that's a huge difference. Hallelujah. Wow for that. But I said all that to say, what he did was he allowed certain situations to come into my life. Like, for instance, say jealousy was on the list. He would allow situations to happen in my life that I would have to choose to allow myself to become jealous, or I could actively fight against that by speaking his word over myself, reminding myself of his promises, basically seeking him out. Those were my two options whenever that came. Another one, covetousness. And if you're someone that's still on social media, I'm only on YouTube, but if you're someone that's still on social media, this is a big one that a lot of people struggle with that they don't even realize. Covetousness, because the social media literally pushes a certain lifestyle. Hey, look at me and my lifestyle. Look what I'm doing. And then people begin to covet that person's lifestyle. So what he'll do is he'll put you in a situation where you have the opportunity to either be covetous or, again, fight against that fleshly nature with the word, with his word, with the sword of the Ruach, which is the word of Yahuwah. So that's what he does. He puts you in a series of, well, he doesn't put you in, he allows a series, because we know it's the enemy that he is using. The enemy still works for Yahuwah, but he's allowing the enemy to come at you with certain situations and scenarios, and you literally have to go out on the battlefield and you have to use your weapons of warfare. Yahuwah, the weapons of warfare that Yahuwah gave to you. And you remember he said the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through him to the pulling down of strongholds. And then he told us in Ephesians 6 what those weapons were. The helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the belt of truth, your feet are prepared with peace. You have the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of Yahuwah. Shield of faith. I think I might have missed something. If I did, just go read Ephesians chapter 6. But anyway, so he tells us what those weapons are, and we have to choose to fight. And this is how he disarms our triggers. So once he disarms that trigger, when he sends you out to fight, because that's you fighting against your own flesh. You have to fight your flesh before you can go out and fight the enemy. You understand? Hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, you'll get it later. For those that have ears to hear, hallelujah. Wow. Anyway, so once he sends you out onto the actual, because that's just training, once he sends you out onto the actual battlefield, understand this. When you encounter people, you're encountering their covenants, their demons that they have, well, their covenants that they have with the kingdom of darkness. You're not encountering that person, you're encountering their triggers, their covenants. So what happens is, if you say something that might, if you speak the truth, because we know the truth makes you free, if you speak the truth, that stronghold, that covenant is going to make itself known from that other person. And see, that what happens is, usually without the other person's knowledge, sometimes they do know if it's somebody that's like close to you, but if it's a stranger, that ruach that is influencing or controlling that person will bring up something from your past about you that used to be true. And if your triggers are not deactivated, it's going to distract you away from the fact that it's a whole demon talking to you out of this person that needs to that you need to do something about. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to be able to focus on what it is that Yahuwah sent you there to do. Now, yes, I do understand. I'm going to speak to the elephant in the room. I do understand you cannot cast a demon out of a person that does not want that demon cast out. They have to want to be set free, made free in order for it to come out. I understand that. What I'm saying is Yahuwah might have just sent you there to place a seed. He might have sent you there for whatever reason he sent you there. You're going to be distracted because your triggers are not deactivated. And that demon is going to go straight for them landmines. That's exactly what it's going to do. It's going to go straight for those landmines. And now all of a sudden, you're going to be sitting there looking crazy and upset and offended because you have triggers. You have triggers. And those triggers are buried. They're buried. So they're not on the surface. These are buried underneath the surface. And you don't see them, but the enemy knows they're there because any trigger that we have is a covenant with the enemy. When they're deactivated, that's because we come into covenant with Yahuwah. Perfectly, this is making sense. But yeah, so he had to take me through that. And it was all kinds of things that was coming up, man. When I tell you, I was thinking that Yahuwah was like mad at me. Like I was thinking all kinds of things. And okay, I'm just going to pause real quick. Okay. Right now I hear a train coming through, and I promise you, like, usually when I'm sitting here in my den, there is nothing going on outside until I hit the record button. And then 50 trains will come through. Dogs will start barking. My alarm on my phone started going off. I just want y'all to understand the reason why I'm even mentioning that to you is because all that's doing is letting me know. I don't know if y'all can hear the train or not, but if you can, all that's doing is letting me know that the enemy does not want me to say what I'm saying right now because he wants me to be distracted by these trains. And the old me, this again, me being transparent, the old me would have been like, all these trains in the background. And I would have paused it and waited for the train. And I would have thrown a hissy fit because all these trains are coming through and I can't record this. And so, I mean, I'm being transparent. But now I'm just like, you know what? It is what it is. You're just going to have to listen to the train in the background if that's the case. But I know you can hear me more than you can hear the train, more than you can hear the dog barking. And here's the thing. You may not have even been able to hear it. But I just thought it was a perfect opportunity to show a real-time example of the fact that that trigger that was in me that would have gotten my panties in a bunch because this train's going by making noise while I'm trying to record this episode has been deactivated. That trigger has been deactivated. And these triggers that we have, they're highly sensitive. It's not a whole lot of pressure that has to be placed on those triggers in order to activate them. Remember I said the landmine is activated by pressure being put on it. So it's usually not a lot. It's just something that reminds you of that traumatic event. The problem that a lot of us have, so let me go back to one of these examples. Um, I think it was with negative changes in thinking and mood. So, one of the symptoms of that is, well, one of the examples of that is you have memory problems, including not remembering important aspects of the traumatic event. The reason why that is so important is because our brains do this thing called compartmentalization. So, depending on the level of trauma that an individual can sustain before their brain compartmentalizes it, it's just depending on it varies from individual to individual. So I might be able to handle more of a traumatic event than some other people, and someone else might be able to handle more of a traumatic event than I can. But once you hit that level, your brain can compartmentalize that event to where you don't even have a memory that that event even happened to you. You might have an inkling that something of a certain nature happened to you a long time ago, maybe when you were a kid, but for whatever reason, you just can't pinpoint what that thing is. And here's the thing, subconsciously, you remember it because it's still in your memory, it's just hidden away in your subconscious because it's what your brain did. It's a defense mechanism that our brains tend to do. All right, so let's go back to the scenario with the family member. I'm not going to use rape per se, I'll use just molestation. And I know these are probably triggering words, but what better place to face this stuff than right here on a podcast episode that is about deliverance. It's time to be delivered from these things. So let's say there's a person that was sexually molested by a family member when they were very young, let's say 4 or 5. Their little toddler brain compartmentalized that event. And let's make it a little girl and an adult male. Okay? So this little girl grows up to be a woman, and because her brain in defense and protection pushed that event into a quarter of the brain that is not remembered, this woman grows up and she has a seemingly healthy life. However, she has issues with a certain type of man or just men in general. And she doesn't understand why. And let's take it a step even further. Let's say that this man that did this to her is someone that was in her life as an authority figure. So now she has a hard time submitting to men. She doesn't understand why. She just, when a man gives her orders, whether it be a boss or whatnot, when a man gives her orders, it just irks her to her core. And she doesn't understand why. And she starts to lash out. And she goes to therapy session after therapy session. She has failed relationship after failed relationship. And she just doesn't understand why it is. And now she starts to believe that she is this horrible person. And she starts to do, you guys just, in your mind, just think about whatever it is that people do. They go on these dating sites. They go to these dating gurus. Like, you've probably seen it. Maybe you've done it. But this is the scenario that's being placed before us. Sometimes they even wind up being lesbians. So y'all know this is all facts. So with that being said, this woman has an issue, and she starts on this journey because she knows she has an issue, but she doesn't know what the issue is stemming from. So she starts on this journey towards healing, and all she does is she starts to show the signs of PTSD. She starts to have intrusive memories, but she doesn't know where they're coming from. Maybe they're coming from nightmares, which, that was a form of the intrusive memories, nightmares, flashbacks. She starts to avoid family members because, the family members might still remember it. And unfortunately, you have some family members that they look at the victim, they do this victim blaming. They look at the victim like, you destroyed our family with this nonsense. And Unfortunately, stuff like this happens. So they've always had these family members in their life that just have an issue with them. And they're like, you know what? I'm on this path to healing, so I'm just going to avoid all these people. Y'all remember hearing this? I'm only going to love those who love me. That's a movement that I used to hear all the time when I was in Christianity. I'm only going to love people that love me. I'm only going to serve people that serve me. I'm only going to support people that support me. That's a form of avoidance. That person is literally showing a sign of PTSD. And it's probably because they were hurt in some type of way. They don't even realize that the way they was hurt is stemming from a traumatic event that actually happened to them in their life. So then they start to have negative changes in their thinking, which you can actually add that. I'm only going to love people that love me. You can add that to that list as well. Or they have a lack of interest in activities that they once enjoyed. You know, we call it depression, we call it self-condemnation, we call it hopelessness. Changes in physical and emotional reactions. They're easily triggered. So that's the cancel culture that I was talking about. All right. And this is all stemming from this little girl that was sexually molested by an authoritative male figure in her life. And there's all kinds of labels that'll be put on this woman as she's growing up. Maybe in high school, she didn't like, male teachers telling her what to do, or the male principal telling her what to do. So she was labeled as a bad child, or a rebel, or, a misfit, you name it. And then when she started dating, she was a disagreeable woman. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Y'all know what word that's the definition for. She was labeled as a disagreeable woman, unsubmissive, combative. And then she started to fall in with that crowd that calls themselves boss bees. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Independent women, because she knows that in her mind she's not a bad person. She's consciously not aware of this traumatic event because her mind has compartmentalized it. And so now she's living this life all the while this trigger is still active. This landmine is still active in her heart. And it's only when we come to Yahuwah and we're like, yo, I want you to show me what's in my heart. And he'll do it. But what's going to happen if you take that same woman and she enters into a relationship with Yahuwah and she asks that question, show me what's in my heart, she's going to remember that traumatic event. He's going to bring it to the forefront. The truth will make you free. You have to face these things, because once you face them, he's going to show you how to disarm them, how to deactivate these triggers so that they cannot be an issue later on down the road. If you're still being triggered by certain words, by certain people, places, and things, that means that your triggers are still active. I mean, your landmines are still active. Your emotional trauma is still present. It's just buried. That's what that means. You have people that are coming into the awakening, coming into the truth, that are coming out of Christianity and sometimes cults and, other religious sects. And they have traumatic memories of different things that happened to them when they were in these things. And so they're coming and bringing that into the truth, and they're not being delivered. And so what they're doing is, now that they know the truth, pride is starting to come in, and they're taking that hurt and pain, and it's making them self-righteous. And then they turn around and now they become the abuser to someone else, because now they know the truth and it puffs them up, and now they're abusing other people. So now the victim becomes the abuser, because that person didn't submit to healing and deliverance that Yahuwah tells us to enter into when we come into a relationship with him. I know that I keep bringing this scripture up, but Matthew 7, where it talks about taking the plank out of your own eye before you can see fit to take the speck out of your brother's. Why do you think it is that I'm always talking about how I went through this and this is what Yahuwah did in my life? Because I had to go through this first before I can come on here and tell you what Yahuwah did for me. Now, he might not do it the exact same way for you, but the whole point is he's doing it for you like he did it for me. And what's really going to blow all of our minds is the fact that he already did it. He already did it. We just have to believe that he already did it. You feel me? And now he's taking us through the steps. He's cultivating his character and nature into us. And part of cultivating the land when you're a farmer, part of tilling that land is pulling up the weeds, turning the soil over to make it fresh and fertile, and softening it up. Like, that's what it is when a farmer is tilling, cultivating the land, and he's preparing it to place seeds in it. So he's tearing up he's uprooting all the weeds in our souls. All the weeds in our souls. And he's turning that soil over to make it fresh and fertile, to keep it from drying out and becoming hard. And he's preparing to plant the seed, which is his word, into our heart. But we have to come to him for deliverance. We have to allow him to disarm our triggers. If anything I said in this episode today has been relatable to you in any shape, form, or fashion, I beseech you to seek Yahuwah for deliverance. His version of healing, which is the only true healing, is deliverance. Not suppression, not avoidance, not any of that stuff. Because when you're doing all that stuff, you're just running away from the issue. And how many of us know that you can't run away from life? I can attest to the fact that I have literally seen spirits, and it's the same spirit, use whoever's closest to me. And the way I know it's a spirit, and the way I know it's the same spirit, is they say the same thing. Now, somebody's probably asking, well, how do you know? It's just because you don't have an issue, and they're just, it's you, and you need to change this, that, and the other. The way I know is because of what they're saying. Telling me that I'm less than a woman, telling me that I'm stupid, telling me that I'll never amount to anything. That is not something that someone is telling you that loves you. That is not something that someone tells you to help you grow. That is something the enemy tells you to kill you spiritually. A person, when Yahuwah is speaking to you through a person, that person is going to tell you the truth, but it's going to be in love. So, for instance, let's go to you're stupid. They're not going to say you're stupid. They're going to be like, hey, you know what? I can see you might be a little ignorant to certain things. Maybe you should do a little bit more praying, fasting, studying, seek Yahuwah for wisdom. That's how they're going to address that. They're not just going to be like, oh man, you're stupid. You're so stupid. That is not, that's not Yahuwah. That's not his voice. That is the enemy. So whenever these people that have been close to me, or here's another one, talking in a condescending way towards me. Now, here's the thing. That was a trigger for me because I was constantly told by an authoritative person in my life about how stupid I was, not knowing all this time that I actually wasn't stupid. It wasn't until I became an adult that I realized that I'm actually fairly intelligent. Hallelujah. So, but when a person would talk to me in a condescending way, it triggered me because I was told so many times as a child on up about how stupid I was. So I'm repeating myself over and over again in hopes that maybe if I say it in different ways, it'll start to make sense if it didn't make sense before. But yeah, so I started to realize that it was the same spirit. And the reason why it was able to infiltrate my mind was because my triggers were active. Like I said, a landmine can remain active for 50 plus years. That's the reason why you have grown folks that are grandparents and sometimes great grandparents acting like children because they haven't been delivered. They haven't been delivered. Their triggers are still active. And here's a word that I've talked about before on this podcast: accountability. The first step into deactivating them is to hold yourself accountable. You got to look at that mirror. You got to figure out what's going on. And in the scenario I gave, well, how am I responsible for what happened to me if, I was molested by, let's say it was an uncle. If I was molested by an uncle, how am I responsible for that? You're not responsible for that. You're responsible for holding on to it if you are able to remember it. You're responsible for holding on to it if you're able to remember it. If you're not able to remember it, you're responsible for going to Yahuwah and asking him to show you those things that you need to let go of. This is the cleaning of your cup. Remember, he said we have to clean the inside of our cup. He told us that, he told his disciples, his Talmudim, that our righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees. The Pharisees, he called them whitewashed tombs, meaning that spiritually they were dead on the inside, but they looked nice. Because remember, they was dressed in those robes. Like, they looked real nice on the outside. But they were dead. They were the walking dead. All right, I think I've babbled long enough. I used to say that in a bad way, but now I just say it in a joking way because that trigger has been deactivated in my life. I hope this blessed you. Prayerfully, it has pointed you in the correct direction, so you can start moving towards your deliverance. Again, one of the things that Yahuwah had me to do is to go on a fast so that he can remove these, he can deactivate these triggers. He can show me what they were. I can hand them over. When I think about Romans 12:1, present yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to Yahuwah. You know what? I think I'm just going to go to it real quick. Hold on. All right. And you guys, I'm so grateful to Yahuwah because I used to be like, when I first came on here, I was like, oh, this podcast has to sound so professional and it has to be free of all kinds of noises and distractions. Listen, trying to do all that is basically trying to perform for you. And he has freed me from that. I don't need to perform for you. I just need to do what he said. Say what he said. Okay? So, Romans 12:1 says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of Elohim, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto Elohim, which is your reasonable service. So, he's telling us, Shaul is telling us that we have to come to Yahuwah, to his altar, and make a sacrifice. But how can you sacrifice something that you don't know exists? So first, you have to fast. Some only come out through prayer and fasting. You have to fast and allow Ruach HaKodesh to show you those things that are in you, that are hidden, that are buried, so that you can then present your body as a living sacrifice, because that is your reasonable service. And once you do that, then you can go forth and you can tell other people how they can do the same thing and how they can be delivered. I mean, it's quite amazing. So I'm going to tell you guys this, and I know somebody out there is probably not going to believe me, but I really don't care. So ever since I was a little girl, I have been able to see Ruachs. Now, we all know that nobody dies and then their spirit starts walking around. Those are all demons. But there are 3 types of Ruachoth that I have personally seen. You have the ones that we've labeled as apparitions. They look like people that used to live. We call them ghosts. Then you have the shadow people. Those are the dark shadow silhouettes. They can come in the form of a just dark blob, um, the silhouette of a person, or sometimes they can even look like the silhouette of an animal. And then you have the ones that are strong men. Those, the ones that I've seen, it's been a silhouette of a humanoid creature, but it was see through. So, I know somebody on here, probably not everybody that's listening has probably seen this movie, but if you have, I'm going to paint a picture for you. So, you remember the movie Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger? So, in that movie, the Predator had a cloaking device when he would go invisible, and you could see like his outline, but he looked invisible. It was just like a distortion, like his whole body like distorted the stuff around him, so you couldn't see him until he moved, and then you could see that something was there, but you couldn't see it. That's how these strong men look. I've seen them. I've seen all three of these multiple occasions. The apparition called I called her the Renaissance woman. It was this woman that looked like a woman from the Renaissance era. She had an emerald green dress on, blonde hair, decked out in jewels. But every time I would see her, I would be in my room sleeping, wake up out of the blue, and she had the most maniacal smile on her face. Um, and I've seen others, but that's just the one that I always remember the most. Um, then you have the shadow people. You know, I've seen some of those. The house that we grew up in Georgia had a shadow person in it. And then you have the strong men. Now, here's the thing. I've seen them everywhere, but it shocked me when I was attending a church. And this was one of those days. It wasn't a Sunday that I was at the church. It was some type of event that was going on, and you had from the fellowship hall, you had to go through the sanctuary to get up to um the children's rooms, I guess you can call them. I couldn't think of what to call it, but anyway, where they would have the children's Bible studies and so on and so forth, and where they would keep the kids during service. So, for whatever reason, I had to go up in there. Well, as I was going back towards the fellowship hall, I had to go into the sanctuary. And with it not being a Sunday, the lights in the sanctuary were off, but, because it was windows, it was stained glass windows all in the church. So there was light filtering through. It just wasn't a whole lot because, stained glass doesn't allow for a whole lot of light to come through. I opened up the door and I stepped into that sanctuary, and I saw these strong men all over the sanctuary. And as I started walking towards the door, across the door I needed to get to was all the way on the other side of the sanctuary. As I started walking across the room towards this door, it felt like I was walking through a pool. Like, it felt like I was walking through water. And I could literally see these beings all around. I mean, the sanctuary was full of them. I felt like I had just swam into a swarm of sharks, like I was in a shark tank. And the most interesting thing about it was, now that I think about it, they couldn't, none of them tried to attack me. None of them touched me. And now that I'm really talking about it, I wasn't scared either. I think I was, if I'm not mistaken, I remember being more annoyed than anything, because I'm like, what are y'all doing? But then I was also shocked because I'm like, this is a church. At the time I was a Christian, so I didn't understand why I would have seen that in a Christian sanctuary. But now it makes a lot of sense as to why I seen it. But yeah, I was shocked, I was irritated, and I wasn't scared. And these things attach to us and they start speaking through us to other people. And sometimes they're whispering in our ears. You know what I'm saying? Now, we're not going to take away the fact that we have to hold ourselves accountable because we choose to listen to them. We choose to do those things because that's what's in our hearts. We choose to do those things that are wrong because even though people might not know what Yahuwah's word says, there's something in us that knows right from wrong. I mean, you got to remember that Hua ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So mankind knows what's good and what's evil. We know we're not supposed to kill people. You know what I'm saying? We know we're not supposed to lie, but we still do it and we find ways to justify it. So hopefully I explained that in the appropriate way. And these things were in the sanctuary. So it makes sense as to the reason why every deliverance service I ever went to in Christianity, you would see the same people down there for the same reasons. So here are some examples of what the symptoms of PTSD look like today. Go on no contact with loved ones indefinitely. While there is a time to go no contact in order to begin the journey toward healing and deliverance at some point, you should be strong enough to minister to those same people without feeling the anxiety of trauma and or being triggered. Domestic violence. This comes from not being able to properly manage your emotions. Loneliness, resulting sometimes in multiple partners. Depression, insomnia, which is a lack of sleep. And lack of sleep has a whole set of problems on its own. You begin to hallucinate. Your mind needs to rest. Lack of accountability, which is, I already talked about, cancel culture. Tolerance in place of the love of Yahuwah. So you tolerate things instead of loving people. Stockholm syndrome, which is when you begin to make excuses for your abuser. The modern independent woman. Passport brothers. So if you don't know what a passport brother is, these are these gentlemen that go to countries specifically like China, Indonesia, to find wives because they are not able to deal with the modern women in America. And all of that, them and the modern women are suffering from PTSD, from traumatic events. Public smear campaigns, which you see happen on YouTube and TikTok all the time, and the list continues. Yahuwah tells us how, Yahusha told his Talmudim how we're to be delivered. We have to come to him. And then when we come to him, the truth makes us free. What is the truth about you? What is the truth about you? What is the truth about what's inside of your heart? What's on your bloodline? What is the truth about that? Because that is what's going to make you free. You confronting those things and handing them over to Yahuwah and taking hold of his nature, character, and authority, which is his name. So what you're doing is, essentially, is you're handing your name over and you're taking his name instead. Hallelujah. Yeah, triggers, you guys. Triggers. We have to disarm them. Or we have to allow Yahuwah to disarm them, I should say. Otherwise, we're going to keep going in cycles. And we're going to wonder why, because those triggers can lie dormant for a long time, 50 plus years. So you'll go along, you think that you're okay, and then 25 years later, that trigger is stepped on, that pressure is put on that landmine, and now you're acting out, you're having an emotional outburst, or you're having memory loss, or you're avoiding, or you're having intrusive memories. Yeah. All right, you guys. If you'd like to get in contact with me, you can contact me at replenishme@gmail.com. As always, much shalom and ahav, and until next time, shalom aleichem.